I've made a huge mistake. So here's how the board is looking. Here's the hole that I cut to put the power button into. That looks good. That wasn't the mistake. I went ahead and soldered these wires to the board on the traces that I scraped off, and they're good solder points. They're really strong and they work really well. The mistake I made, it wasn't a huge mistake, but I feel really dumb, was I made some assumptions about how the MP3 player was wired up based off of some other gadgets that I've messed around with. I assumed that all of the buttons had a ground, and that they shared a ground the way that the controller board does. But in truth, I went in to kind of use my continuity tester to see which points were ground, if it was the inner one or the outer one, and so I'm testing all these to see if any of them are continuous one with another, and turns out that it's this pattern. I thought that there would be 6 total wires, 1 ground and then 1 each for these 5 buttons, but it's actually they all operate on just 4 circuits, and I've tried to map them out if you can see them there. So the inside of these 3 are all continuous, and if you bridge any of those with these other lines, then it activates the function of that button. So all of these buttons are just a unique combination of one of these 4 lines. And so this soldering that I've done is useless, because now I need to recreate these 4 lines somehow on this board. I can either do that, or I can solder 2 wires to each button the way that I've done it before, but I hesitate to show you this other one that I made, but it's just a huge mess of wires because there's so many wires inside. And this was one of the first projects I ever did, and so it's not really well done, but it's just 2 wires to each button, so it's a total of 10 wires just for the buttons, and then also the headphone port and also the power, and I wanted to avoid that. And so I can do it with just 4 wires instead of 10, but I need to invent some way to mirror these circuits that the MP3 player uses on here. I'm going to go ahead and try it. I've already cut some of these traces so that I could use both sides of the button. It's going to be a little tricky because this pad goes right here, but all 3 of these share a ground underneath that pad. And that wouldn't have been a problem if everything was sharing a ground, but now I need to find some way to, solder a wire to the middle on both sides of that, possibly, and lead it out in a way that it won't interrupt anything. I don't know, hope it won't get in the way. I think it'll work, but ignore everything I said about common ground, because I'm going to have to redo all this stuff and cut more traces so I can isolate it's going to be kind of a mess, but I'll see if I can work it out. Okay, I actually got it working. I managed to work out the zones on this board. I had to link some parts together with wires, do a lot of cutting of other parts, other traces, but I got it to where the 2 halves of each button correspond to the 2 zones that they link up to on the MP3 board. And I tested it and it works, and so that's a huge relief to me that I can move forward with it. One thing that I should say, it didn't work at first. It had some weird behaviors. It was acting like some buttons were pushed down forever, until I cut all the traces going into this blob here, and you can see how I kind of unceremoniously just made huge scratches on there. But after I did that, everything worked. So if anyone wants to do this at home, that's something that you got to do. This part obviously is not optimal. I had to put a wire into the center of the D-pad, and to do that I had to put the D-pad there because it has to, I can't sneak it in after it's all soldered in place, so I had to do that. But I think it works. It doesn't really get in the way too much. I think it'll work okay. I can go into how I did the zones and provide more detail about that if anyone's interested. But for now, I matched the zones how they were laid out on here, and I soldered them up. only 4 wires. I like that. Just 4 wires, soldered them to a point from each zone, and it works okay. I also went ahead and soldered this power switch, this toggle switch, to the contacts on the power button. And something I also might do is just hot glue that into the on position so that it's always on, or sorry, the off position. That's what I meant to say, the off position, so that as long as both switches are off, then the whole thing is off, and it can be turned on by just pushing this one into the on position. And that works as well. And you can see the red blinking light. About that, I have some tiny little LEDs. If you can see this, that's a red LED, so I might just wire up some contacts. I don't think that I can successfully relocate that, desolder it without destroying it. Maybe I should be able to do that, but I'm not going to try that. So I'm just going to wire up both sides of that to both sides of this LED, and so that you can, I'll have to pick some spot on here to put it. I might just put it somewhere along this crack at the top, so that you can see the light to tell if it's on or not. Let's see what else. Hooked up the headphone port so I could test it. So really, as soon as I get that LED all soldered up, I'm ready to mount it into the controller case. So that's exciting. And from there, it's just kind of putting it where it goes. And once this board is mounted in place, I can start thinking about the power button, the B button. And for that, I guess I'm just going to glue this to the switch so that it's on there, and then have the board in place where it goes right here, and then just kind of move the B button up and down from behind there until it looks like it's at about the right height. And I'll use the A button, I'll have it in there as sort of a reference, and when it looks like it's about the right height, I'll glue it in place right there so that it looks normal when everything is off. I'm about to epoxy everything in place. I sort of glued this loosely in place with some hot glue. Something I had to do was desolder all these wires. They were all attached to the board with hot glue, and I had to desolder them because the way that they were kind of coming off the board, they didn't reach. I couldn't put this board in place because the wires were attached weird. I had to desolder all of them and reattach them once it was all in place. So these wires weren't long enough, and I didn't plan well enough to where they had to kind of follow off. I actually had to extend this one because it's not long enough. It comes off the corner here. Anyway, better planning would have prevented that, though it wasn't that bad. It's just desoldering and resoldering and then re-gluing. Here's the power button in place on the B button. I think it looks good. I have to pick a place to put the blinking LED, and I discovered that you can, I don't know if you can see that actually, but you can, if there's not light shining right on it, you can actually see it right through the plastic. Or I was thinking maybe I could put it behind the B button, if you can see that any better. What I did on my old one was I just kind of cut a little hole on the top so that you could see it through the top if you wanted to see if it was on. I might just put it in the corner and then you could see it if it's on that way. So I just need to epoxy everything in place so it's nice and sturdy, and then that's kind of the last step. And there it is. I epoxied everything in place. I put some kind of garbage plastic right there to help anchor it, this board in place, so you could push on the USB and the SD card slots without worrying about it. The headphone jack is anchored by the controller board, so it's nice and strong, and I epoxied that together. The B button is epoxied in place. This back side of the controller has these chunks of plastic there to kind of brace the board against the buttons so that they're nice and firm when you push the buttons. Well, I'm using this space, and so I had to Dremel that post away. So I went ahead and put some epoxy between the board and the front of the case, and that is fine as long as I never need to take it apart. I actually, when I first put it together, the next track button didn't work no matter what I tried, and so I had to kind of I had to take it back apart and break that epoxy bond, and also on the headphone jack, so that I could fix it. and I made sure that it was soldered in place. One of the wires had come loose, so I soldered it in place and secured it with hot glue, and now it's working again. I decided on that corner for the LED light, and I put some epoxy there too. I kind of tried to sand down the plastic a little bit so it could shine through a little bit better. It works okay. So that's that. Just got to put it back together. And there it is. I like how it turned out. I'll go ahead and I'll plug in some headphones and I'll try to play it so that you can hear it. I'll hold one of these earbuds up to my microphone. I don't know if you'll be able to hear. This might be a dumb idea. So that's there. We'll do the volume up, volume back down, next track, previous track, and play and pause button. So it all works and it looks great, nice and retro. So there you go. There's the MP3 player inside of a Nintendo controller.